Hi, in this video, I cover how to calculate equivalent units and unit costs using the FIFO method. Equivalent units of production represent the number of physical units that could have been completed during the period when we consider the amount of material and conversion costs that were used. Think of a bottling plant with bottles of soda. The bottles of soda are being filled continuously, and not all bottles will be finished at the end of the month. Equivalent units says we can take those partially completed units and combine them into equivalent units. For example, if we have 4 units that are 25% complete, those would represent 1 equivalent unit. There's 2 common methods for calculating equivalent units, the FIFO method and the weighted average method. In the FIFO method, we are concerned with first in, first out, and therefore we consider the beginning of the period information, such as the degree of completion and how much additional resources were added into the period. In the weighted average method, we are not concerned with the beginning information, and we look at all resources added to date. Now, in this video, I just cover FIFO. I have another video where I cover the weighted average method. So let's look at a FIFO example. So first, we're going to calculate our physical units. We have some beginning work in process, some units started, and we're told the units completed, but not the units in ending inventory. We can use our formula that beginning units plus units started equals our ending work in process plus our units completed. What this formula is telling us is that basically all of the units that we worked with during the period equals either our units that are completed or ones that are still in process in our ending work in process. So when we plug in the elements from our formula, we can then solve our formula to determine that our units in ending work in process is 1,100 units. Next, we're going to calculate equivalent units. Again, we can start with filling in the information we already have. We're told the beginning work in process, okay? And FIFO assumes that beginning work in process is completed first. Therefore, as long as the units completed is more than the beginning work in process, all beginning work in process is considered to be completed. Next, we can take our units ending inventory and plug in that information. And now we need to determine our units started and completed. During the period, we started 4,660 units, but not all of those were necessarily completed. So we can use our formula here to take our total units completed minus the beginning WIP that we assume is completed to figure out how many units started during the period were also completed during that period. We can plug in the calculation and determine that our units started and completed is 45,500. Now we have our total units accounted for. Next, we need to look at the degree of completion. Notice that the degree of completion is different between the direct materials and the conversion costs. For this reason, we have to calculate 2 sets of equivalent units, one for direct materials and one for conversion costs. So let's start with direct materials. Okay. Again, under the FIFO method, we need to look at our beginning work in process and see what was completed during the period. In order to figure out how much more work was done during the period, we're going to take 100%, meaning it was done, minus the amount of completion that we had at the beginning. In this case, for direct materials, the units in process were 100% done with materials. Now, they were still in work in process because they weren't done with regards to conversion costs, but they were done with regards to materials. So when we calculate the percent added this period, it actually comes out to 0 because there were no more materials to add. So we're just going to put a 0 here in our percent added this period. Next, we can look at our units started and completed. Again, these units were completed, which means they are 100% done. So we can go ahead and put a 100% in our table. Lastly, we need to look at our units and ending work in process. Our units and ending work in process are still in work in process because they are not done. We are given the degree of completion in our table of information, and we can see that these are actually 0% done with regards to direct materials. I'm going to go ahead and take that amount and plug it into my table. Next, we can calculate the equivalent units. To determine the equivalent units, we're going to take the physical units and multiply them by the percent added this period in our table. We can multiply those out, add them up, and we determine that our equivalent units for direct materials is 45,500. Now we have to repeat this process for conversion costs. Again, the degree of completion is different between conversion costs and direct materials. And for this reason, we're doing two sets of equivalent units. So now we're looking at how much is completed with regards to conversion costs. So we start with our beginning work in process, determine the amount that was completed during the period by taking 100% minus the degree of completion that was given at the beginning. In this case, it was 60% with regards to conversion costs. Since the items in process were already 60% complete, that means during the period, the other 40% was added in. And so we put 40% in our table. Again, we look at our units started and completed. They're completed, so they're 100% done. So we put 100% in our table. And lastly, we look at our units in ending inventory. We look at the amount given in the data table. It tells us they are 30% complete with regards to conversion. So we put a 30% in our table. Next, we calculate it out by taking the physical units times that percent added this period, and that gives us the equivalent units. And so we can see here that our equivalent units for conversion is 46,550. Now, one last time, I just want to point out, again, we did two sets of equivalent units because the percents of completion were different, and so the amounts added this period were different. And so we ended up with two different numbers for equivalent units. And next we can look at the cost. So here we have some costs. We have our beginning costs plus costs added in this period. We can just total those up to get our total cost to be accounted for. And now to figure out our cost per equivalent unit, we're going to take our cost added this period and divide it by the equivalent units. Now remember, we had different equivalent units. So for each item, we need to use our different equivalent units. We take just the cost added this period, put those into our table, and then we're going to divide by the equivalent units we figured out in step 2. And now we've determined our cost per equivalent unit. Okay, so that's how we do it under the FIFO method. Again, I have another video where I go over the weighted average method of calculating equivalent units and unit costs.